Welcome to Hometown Heroes, the Korean War that many people think is the forgotten war. Today we're going to learn that it's not the forgotten war. And the Korean War only lasted a few years, but there was over 38,000 people that got killed, and there's still over 7,000 people missing from that war. Mary, tell us about our guests today.
I'm really excited to have these folks here today. Larry is really one of a kind. He is such a soft-spoken guy. You would hardly know he's there half the time, but boy, he has a booming voice when it comes to talking about the Korean War. And I'm so grateful to have met and spent time with Larry. And he was not only is he a Korean War veteran, but he's a past president of the National Korean War Veterans Association, which Sherri is involved with. And I recently was able to attend a dinner that was put on by the South Koreans, and I'm sure Sherri's going to share more of that and probably some pictures of what an incredible event that was, that the South Korean people still hold people like Larry in such high esteem for what they did, so that the South Koreans today are still a free and democratic society. What a neat thing. And I had the opportunity to spend some time with Larry and his son, John, at a couple of Rangers games, and most recently, one that Lockheed Martin folks hosted for Larry, where he was the one honoree for the night. And what a special night that was. So I'm very grateful to have these two people here that are making such a big difference in our community.
Absolutely. And not just a Korean War veteran, but a Texas A&M graduate. So,
those are my favorite.
Sherri, did you graduate from A&M also?
I'm sorry?
Did you graduate from A&M?
I did not, but I'm an Aggie now because they published my book.
Good. Okay. But Larry, what year did you graduate from A&M?
1949, a long time ago.
Well, tell us a little bit about you, Larry. You were a West Texas boy and went to A&M and then went into the Army and went to Korea. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, I graduated from Odessa High School. That was my alma mater there. And after graduating from high school, I enrolled in Texas A&M in 1945 and graduated in 1949 with a degree in mechanical engineering and a commission of second lieutenant in the Army. I chose, and at A&M, you have a chance to choose the branch you want to be in. So I thought after World War II, we'd never need it anyway. So I wanted to choose one of the combat branches, but not the infantry. I wanted to be in the artillery. So I took artillery training in the ROTC at A&M. And lo and behold, I was out of school a year before the Korean War started. And I was in a reserve unit in Midland. And as soon as the war started, they activated our reserve unit that had a little over 30 officers and sent all of us to Camp Chaffee. That was kind of the beginning of my 2-year commitment to the Army.
But your commitment lasted a little bit longer whenever you went to Korea, didn't it?
Well, yeah, Korea got to be a pretty long time, but I stayed at Camp Chaffee training recruits. They were drafting new people all the time, and we'd periodically get groups at Camp Chaffee. Our assignment was to make soldiers out of civilians that didn't want to be there. So it was a pretty tough assignment. And I was in charge of a big part of the training. So some of the officers from Camp Chaffee went to Korea long before I did because of my responsibility at Camp Chaffee. But later on, around the first of 1952, it got so bad over there that they needed foreign observers. And since that was my MOS, they reached out and pulled in a bunch of replacements. That's another story in itself of being a replacement, coming as a single person out of in Arkansas in that case, to go and find a place over there where you belong. So replacements I endorse because they all were pretty lonely. I mean, that was if you ever think about going to a place like that where you don't know anybody or what's going on, it's a real challenge.
And at Camp Chaffee, you were just opening that up from World War II, correct?
Correct. Yeah. When our group of officers went to Camp Chaffee, it still had weeds and BOQ, the barracks were all unfinished. I mean, it was a mess. So they gave us our first assignment is to go out and clean up the weeds. And I was disappointed. I thought they'd treat officers better than that. But our job was to get rid of all the weeds and get the barracks ready for the new recruits that came in. So we had, I guess, a group of about 50 officers from all over the country that were there first trying to get Camp Chaffee opened up.
And I had a similar experience at Fort Ord whenever we reactivated the 7th Infantry Division, redoing those barracks. We just graduated from nursing school and they had us out there painting and doing carpenter work for the first 2 or 3 months. We get one road of barracks done, and they say, "Oh, we're going to move next door and do this next road." And I think Sherri's got some ties to Fort Ord too, with her father, who's a World War II veteran. So, but Larry, you went to Korea as a forward observer, and you had some pretty interesting experiences there, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, my first assignment was with the 1st Rock Division, Republic of Korea, and they had several divisions that are intermingled with our U.S. troops. So my first assignment after I got there was to go, and I was attached to a 1st Rock Division. And a foreign observer's job is to direct the artillery against the enemy targets. So we always worked with the company commander very closely in locating where they wanted the fire to be directed. I was in the 3rd Infantry Division, and we were supporting at that time the 1st Rock Division in the line. So believe me, it was a little difficult when things got pretty hot to be able to speak to the company commander through an interpreter and figure out what he was trying to say. But that's what we did all along there at that time when the 3rd was actually in reserve, but the forward observers and the artillery was supporting the Rock Division and whatever happened on the MLR.
So your unit, your artillery unit, was behind you, and there was 3 or 4 Americans with you,
Yeah,
with the
we
Koreans.
had a team of 4 that worked with whatever company we were attached to. And at that point, we were just like the infantry in the trenches, except my job was to make sure the artillery got to where the company commander wanted it. So when we would go in a place like that, we'd have a radio operator and an interpreter and one other helper that would try to provide this service and provide it to be directed at the enemy when we had assaults, which we did. We had a number of Chinese assaults that they'd try to come across the Imjin River up the side of the mountain where we were. Of course, to describe a little bit about the trenches, they were nothing more than just a hole in the ground with barbed wire up on the edge of the trench. So many times, the Chinese, in our case, would get up to the wire and we had some hand-to-hand fighting at that time, but never liked to have anything like that get that far.
And you could actually see the Chinese across the river kind of getting ready to come over to attack, couldn't you?
Yeah, they'd come in usually about 1 or 2 in the morning, and it would all begin by flares. They'd shoot up a lot of flares in the sky to give them a chance to see where they were going, and they'd blow bugles and come in masses, really, just more people than you could count. Looked like ants coming up the side of the hill, and they kept, and as a lot of people know, in Korean War, not all the Chinese that were fighting had weapons, but their job was just to flow en masse. And the ones that were killed in front of them, they'd pick up their weapons and come on behind them. The loss of life for the Chinese was incredible, but they didn't seem to mind it.
And then after one of those attacks, the next day you'd look out and there were bodies everywhere, weren't there?
Correct. Yeah, we had, at least first night I was there, it was a terrible indoctrination, but we had some of the Chinese that got as close to the trenches as in the wire in front of it. So, and it took them days sometimes to get the bodies down off the hill, but we tried to let them do that.
Mm.
Actually, where I was and when I was involved, we never did get any in the trenches. They just got to the edge of it where the wire was.
One thing that was important that they told you when you went there is to stay right with the company commander.
That is correct.
Because if they could leave you if you weren't with the company commander.
That is correct. The story goes, which is actually very true, when I relieved the part observer that had been there, he gave me one message and he says, keep your eye on that company commander, because if they bug out, you want to go with them. In several cases, we'd had part observers that were left behind when the Koreans went off and left them, and we had several that were actually captured or killed because the Koreans had left them.
You know, whenever we talked yesterday, one of the things I really wanted to find out, you were with the Koreans, but you didn't eat their food very often. Most of it was sea rations.
Right. In fact, we didn't eat any of the Korean food because we tried to take plenty of food ourselves. In that case, the sea rations, we had several choices of beans and weenies and hamburger and what was that? Hash. Anyway, we had 4 different choices we could get out of a box of sea rations, and we had a little sterno stove that we could warm the food on when we wanted to. But that's most of the time, that's what we ate while we were in the front.
And it was, you know, we think so much about the harsh winters that they had during the Korean War, but whenever you were there, it was cold, but not, 30 degrees below zero or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, my period of time that I was there was early February to October. And what we did, we kind of lived through the early spring, which the Chinese felt like that was a good time to try to gain back some ground. So we had a lot of assault during that time and through the summer, which was rainy and hot. July is the Korean rainy month, and we had some living bunkers that caved in when the sandbags, well, first, the places where we stayed and lived in our outpost were made of heavy logs and sandbags, all stacked on top of each other. So when the rain got real heavy, those sandbags would get wet and some of them would fall in from the sides of the bunker and we had some killed because the bunkers caved in on
Mm. And talking about death in the Korean War, Sherri is a member of Gold Star family. Her uncle was in Korea. And tell us about your uncle, Sherri.
Well, um, like so many young men in Korea and World War II, especially Southern boys, my whole family is from East Texas. Uh, they wanted to do their part. They wanted to serve their country. And my Uncle David, which, everybody in the family knew him as Uncle Davy, uh, he's a big old strapping country boy in that picture. Um, and he was 16 years old, had just turned 16 in January 1950. And he, he wanted to be a soldier. And he talked about this since he was a little boy. He wanted to be a soldier, just like all the Steward boys wanted to be. My dad wanted to be a soldier. His father was a great World War One hero. He actually got gassed at the Meuse Argonne and was at Chateau Thierry and you name it. He was a great hero, actually received the French Croix de Guerre. And he, all the boys in the Steward family wanted to be a soldier. Well, he just couldn't wait until he turned 17. Dad had come back from World War II, and he made his mind up that he was going to enlist, and he did. And interestingly enough, a lot of people don't realize that there were somewhere estimated between 250,000 to 300,000 underage soldiers in World War II in Korea, and David just happened to be one of them. But speaking of Korea, sadly, he was there, in the early months of the war when some of the most brutal fighting of that war occurred and more casualties than ever. I mean, he was there for the breakout of Pusan Perimeter. He was there in the early days because he landed in July of 1950. Well, it was pretty serious at that time. His first day in Korea, first evening, because they got there at night, was August 31st, 1950. And he lasted 21 days and was missing in action. And for months, he lay in a half shelter grave. And a lot of people also don't realize that the Korean War was the first war where we actually recovered soldiers' bodies during battle. And, in the past, you waited till all the battles were completed and the graves registration people would go in. But in the Korean War, we began to recover. There were so many young men dying at the outset of the Korean War. 460 per 1,000 in the early days of the war. That's incredible. And so they began to try to recover some of these young men. And David was recovered months later. And of course, my father, who was in serving again on the front lines, this time not in World War II, but in Korea, was charged with being special escort to bring his baby brother's body back to the tiny town of Atlanta, Texas, at the time population about 3,600. And this is actually a photograph of my father, who, back in the Far East Texas at that time, you brought the soldiers home to the old farm or the old home place to lie in state for a day or two. And we don't really encourage that now. We don't really encourage brothers, fathers, very immediate family members bringing their family home as special escort, because the trauma of that is very significant. And I really feel that this is one of the things that helped send my dad into a tailspin.
But your daddy in World War II had already seen a lot of war and a lot of battles in Europe.
Yes, sir. In fact, he was in some of the worst fighting. Got there in the winter of 44 and 45. And what happened to Pop was what happened to so many young men. He was a replacement because we lost so many men, of course, at D-Day. And then the Hurtgen Forest, which my father's infantry division fought, just vicious fighting in the Hurtgen Forest, and a little bit of the Battle of the Bulge, the capture of the Schwamenel Dam, and then on to the Remagen Bridge, which the 78th Infantry Division was one of the first infantry divisions across the bridge. 9th Armored took the bridge, and then on March 7th, and then by March 8th, our troops, our infantry divisions, including the 78th, were trying to get across it with Stuka-Ds dive bombing them. And, Dad, part of the book, I give my dad's account of crossing the Remagen Bridge. But then after that, he wound up in the Ruhr Pocket, in which we had 10,000 casualties. And so, yes, he had seen horrible combat. And I will say this, a lot of people have asked me, well, what in the world made him re-up to go back to Korea? He re-upped before the Korean War in 1948. He came back home. He didn't know anything but being a soldier. That was all he knew. He was at this time in full throttle throes of PTSD. But of course, no one knew what that was in 1948 or 49 or 50. Not until 1980 did we add it to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of a mental illness. And so only after another entire generation of scarred veterans came home did we really have any knowledge of PTSD. Back then they called it either shell shock or battle fatigue, combat fatigue. And so my dad was one of those among the many, many hundreds of thousands of young men who came back and simply, was told to get a job, get married, you'll be okay. And it didn't work out like that. As I said, the only thing he knew was being a soldier. And he was training troops on the beaches of California, as the recruiters told him. And that dream came to be. But then the Korean War broke out. And they were looking for men like my dad, experienced men, to send to the front lines. And he wound up on the front lines just, after his baby brother had gone missing in action. And I think this and so many things just deepened his PTSD. I would like to emphasize that the book Bringing Davy Home is not and was never meant to be just about my father and my uncle. These two young men were just the embodiment of every young man and woman who has answered the call to defend liberty and freedom, not only here at home, but across this world. And so the book is really about all of them, and I make that point in the book. It has two very important themes. It has the theme of the psychological trauma that our warriors must endure even today. And I am very good friends with a lot of young men. In fact, I was a teacher for 30 years, and I taught a lot of these men, young men. And they, after 9/11, they wound up in the war on terror. They wound up in Fallujah. They wound up getting Purple Hearts by the age of 19. And they wound up doing 4 and 5 tours of duty in Iraq, Afghanistan. So this is still going on, and it was important to me to tell this story from an angle not only of a soldier's daughter who witnessed this since my earliest recollections, but to tell the story of just what we demand of our warriors, not back in just in Korea, World War II, Vietnam, but what we demand of them at this moment. And we, of course, we all saw a few months ago in 2021, we all saw it's still happening. We're still bringing our young men and young women home in flag draped coffins. So I wanted to tell that story. And very, very importantly, I wanted to tell the story about the families, not just the Gold Star families, of the missing in action, the killed in action, but in particular the children and the spouses of these young warriors, men and women, who we ask right now at this present time to put themselves into harm's way. I wanted to tell their stories. They are what I call the forgotten casualties. And I am very, very much hoping that we can shine a light on the sacrifices of our warriors' families, because no one knows how great these sacrifices are.
Absolutely. And Larry, you were just kind of a newlywed whenever you went Army, and so your wife had to endure you going off to war. And how did she cope while you were gone?
Well, you're right. We had gotten married in December of 1950. And when I went to Korea, we had a little girl named Martha that was 3 months old. So Betty turned out to be part of my saving grace there, because she wrote me a letter every day and sent pictures about Martha and how she had grown. And I guess that helped me survive a lot of things that I went through, because I knew they were there at home waiting for me, and I could hardly wait to get back to see them. But that's the position of a lot of soldiers that go off and leave families behind. I mean, it's a dreadful thing to have to do, but I'd like to put in the word for the World War II veterans, those that finished World War II like Sherri's father did. Didn't think there would ever be another war, so they didn't mind signing up for the reserves. But as a matter of fact, they were the mainstay of General MacArthur's armies at first. A lot of them were World War II veterans and were killed early in that war because they were just sucked in without. I had a good friend that I knew very well named Joe Allison, that was a World War II veteran, lived in Dallas, was pursuing his peaceful life when the war started over there, but he activated his reserve unit, and I was with him at Camp Chaffee for several months, and Betty and I got to know him and his family really well. But he was one of the early ones that they sucked, because he was already experienced. They sucked him into Korea in 1951, and he was actually a platoon leader. He was a first lieutenant from the Second World War, and he and another friend of his were killed 3 weeks after they got to Korea. So World War II veterans really did a lot, and Sherri's father was one of them that was pulled in because he was in the reserves and sent directly to Korea to try to help. But General MacArthur, in my view, made a lot of mistakes early in that war, and especially in the Chosin Reservoir. He decided his troops were going to go all the way north to the Yalu River, and he had a lot of intelligence that was saying, don't do that. The Chinese were coming into the war, but he persisted. had sent the 7th Infantry Division and the 1st Marine Division up next to the Yalu River, which is about as far as you can go and still be in Korea. And a lot of them got surrounded and trapped and killed. They lost a full regiment of the 7th Infantry Division because they were surrounded. And if you ever have any interest in knowing what the Korean War was about early on, you need to pick up a book called East of the Chosen. That'll tell you exactly what happened to the 7th Infantry Division. And a lot of those were World War II veterans that were just thrust into the war early without proper training or revival of what their skills needed to be.
And our friend, General Carey, Lieutenant General Carey, Marine Corps, he was at the Chosin Reservoir, and I've heard him share a few stories about his experiences over there. And you know, it was a terrible, terrible battle. It was cold, and then the Marines were surrounded, and I think it was Chessie Puller said something about, you know, we don't have to worry about where the enemy is because they're all around us. And he was kind of wondering about where the Army was because they were supposed to kind of help shore up things. So some great heroes.
The Army was surrounded and trapped, and most of them killed at the time when General Carey, who was I think a second lieutenant at the time, was trying to get the Marines protected. One of his experiences, I know he's probably told you, was trying to take East Hill, which was part of the Chosin Reservoir battle. And he did a lot of things there that I think were very close and very tough. And he managed to survive, but he made one vow that he was not going to stay on the ground. He wanted to be a pilot. So he ended up learning how to fly and was actually a jet pilot during the Vietnam War. And he's a
great.
3-star general, by the way, in the Marines. That's a real accomplishment.
He's a great American. So let's go back to you were in the trenches. How long did you stay up there in the trenches?
Well, I stayed as long as the 3rd Division was in the line. I was just like the infantry. So I ended up staying in the front line from the time I got over there till, I guess, September when I left in 1952. So I was there from about February to September of 52.
And then after
most of the time, you know, they generally gave everybody a chance to go on R&R, but my time was up. I had a 24-month obligation, and some of them they didn't let out even when they were supposed to because in Korea they were still running short on people. But I got sent home in September of 52 after I'd been with the 3rd Infantry Division.
what did you do when you came home?
Well, that's another story. My wife and my sister met me in San Francisco, and I came back. I flew over there in a plane to get me there in a hurry, and came back on the slow boat, the A.W. Brewster. And we docked in San Francisco, and she met me there. And my sister had driven with her out to San Francisco, and my sister rode a bus back home. And Betty and I took our time driving back home in our car. At that time, it was a wonderful thing. I had a 30-day leave, so I was able to get back into the throes of civilian life pretty quickly. But another thing I'd like to add is soldiers like I was, you know, the people in the United States didn't want that war. I don't blame them. I mean, it wasn't a good thing. It was just 5 years after World War II. So all of us that came back met with a lot of strange feelings about because you're a Korean veteran and you didn't save the country, they didn't know at the time that we actually did save the country. We don't think you were worth anything going to Korea, and the U.S. shouldn't have done it. And we were kind of faced with some of the things the Vietnam veterans were faced with, that you went to Korea, so what? It doesn't mean anything at the time, and we left Korea in pretty bad shape. But we know now that that was not the forgotten war, but the forgotten victory. There are 50 million people in South Korea living the freedom and being able to really appreciate life compared to those in North Korea. And over the years, South Korea has developed and is one of the largest shipping companies in the world. I think they're rated 10th or 11th in the world with the things they're able to do and ship out of Korea. So I believe, and I'm very strong in that belief, that we did good. A lot of the Korean veterans don't think we did, but we actually did save a people and save a country.
And they're still thriving, unlike Vietnam, South Vietnam, unlike Afghanistan and Iraq. Uh, there was a victory because all these years later, 70 years later, the people are living in freedom.
You know, that was one of the things when Larry said that. I've never heard anybody say that before. And that really hit me. It really struck me how right he is, that it's the forgotten victory, because had we not gone in and helped them, had people like Larry and Ed Ursary and all of these folks that we know, Jim Sharp, all of these guys, had they not done what they did to help those South Korean people, the South Korean people would be living the same life the North Korean people are living today. What a difference. I mean, it's two totally polar opposites between those two countries. And it's all because of what people like Larry did. And that really struck me when he said that. You know, I had never heard it put that way before.
And you told me that.
Another thing to add to that, there's not another country in the world that appreciates what we did more than the Koreans. There are actually two organizations in Korea that sponsor revisit trips for the veterans. And Sherri got to go on a couple of those trips, but they want to tell you and want to tell your country that you saved us and we appreciate it. And they invite us to go over on revisit trips to see what Korea looks like today. And I've actually been back over there probably 6 times. And part of that was while I was president of the National Association. But they will meet you on the street and said, thank you for what you did. And I think that is a noteworthy thing for the rest of the world to show you did something for us. I think in Europe, that's another one of those things that we saved Europe for the rest of the time, really. And Koreans, I think, continue to say thank you because you saved our lives and we're able to thrive in a democracy and live in freedom.
Amen.
You and Sherri got to go on a trip together over there. Was that while you were the president of the National Organization for the Korean Veterans?
Yes, it was.
And that was a good trip, wasn't it, Sherri?
Well, I don't mind saying this. Of course, Mr. Kinard and all of the Chapter 215 veterans, General Kerry, also, they're all my heroes. But Mr. Kinard did something for me that I can never forget, because he invited my sister and my son, who's the namesake of Uncle Davy. He invited us to go with him on that 2016 trip. And I'm not afraid to say that I was daddy's girl. And I didn't like what happened to my dad and my uncle in Korea. And I'm well read, but I still didn't like it. And I didn't know if I ever wanted to go there. I just had a bad feeling about it. And Mr. Kinard invited us on that trip. And I'll tell you, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because it, in some way, you know, here I was, this little girl that grew up with a dad who had, you know, just terrible PTSD, the sweetest man in the world. And always looking at that picture since I was just a little tiny girl, always looking at the picture of Uncle Dave, but never being able to ask about it, but always seeing in my eyes the suffering of my dad when I did ask about it. So I wasn't real happy with Korean Peninsula, north or south, you know. And when Mr. Kinard asked us to go, I wasn't sure I wanted to go. My sister was going to go. My sister was in the Army during the Vietnam War. She was a nurse. And my son said, "Oh, come on, Mom, it might do you some good." And so I went over with Mr. Kinard, and he gave me, as I said, the greatest gift, because as soon as I stepped off that plane, there were just throngs of South Korean people. Some of them would bow. If you had a Gold Star pin on, they would bow to you, literally, and to the veterans. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is different than I thought it was going to be. And then they set me up to talk to 400 high school students at Daeji Senior High. And that was so life-changing. I looked out upon these young kids who were the same age as Uncle David. And they were so bright and so smart. They knew everything about the Korean War. They knew a lot more than our American kids do about World War II. And a lot they knew about Vietnam. They just were so brilliant. And I looked out on those beautiful little faces, and it just did something to me. I said, well, wait a minute. None of them would even be here if it weren't for Uncle David, if it weren't for Dad's suffering, it weren't for Mr. Kinard, General Carey. And I never forgot that. And so that's a gift that Mr. Kinard gave me. And I mean, I'm eternally grateful for it, because I know that Uncle Davy, you know, I know that he didn't die in vain. And I know that although my poor little dad suffered immeasurably, it wasn't in vain. The whole nation is free and prosperous.
It brought some closure to what you had been through, experiencing your uncle getting first missing in action and then killed in action, and to see how it affected your family. So,
Yes, sir. And I will tell you that, you know, I did a lot of research for this book because I wanted to be scholarly. I didn't want it to just be some story about a couple of soldiers, and you know, it was a great story, but I had so many resources. I had all the letters from the front line. I'd written off and gotten an individual deceased personnel file that was lost, said to be lost on Uncle David, much more than I bargained for, about 4 or 5 inches thick. Had letters that my grandmother had written the War Department, incredibly, but it also had field autopsy reports, and it had graves registration reports. And believe me, after growing up in a Gold Star family, that was rough. It was dark. It was excruciatingly painful, but I came to understand better than anyone who could have helped me. I came to understand grandmother's suffering for losing her little boy, Dad's suffering for losing his brother. And it just, but Mr. Kinard gave me that wonderful gift of finally getting closure. And if I could say this, I want to say that Mr. Kinard and General Carey helped. I was able to help get a great warrior of the Chosin Reservoir, Major Harvey H. Storms, missing in action for 70 years. His remains were recovered in the 55 crates that were brought back when President Trump was in office. And I managed to get the Defense Department by just pestering them into submission to get them to let him touch Texas soil one last time before he flew off to meet his family, while the family waited for his returns in Washington, D.C. And guess who greeted this great hero of the Korean War? At 4:00 in the morning, we got them all out there. Mr. Larry Kinard, General Carey, Mr. Marvin Dunn, who lost his leg, his eye, and his ear punchable.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say that about them because that was unbelievable.
Well, Rick, I'd like to add something about Sherri. Getting her involved with Korean veterans paid off in so many ways. She became a stabilizing force with the trips to Korea by inviting and getting the Gold Star families involved. And she's really selected groups of Gold Star families from all over the United States to go back to Korea and visit. And I think it helped. And Sherri, you can add to this, it helped those families get a little relief because of the loss of their loved one. But she's a fireball. When she starts out to do something, she makes sure it gets done.
Well, I think it gives them a little closure. I know what that feels like. And I never got to meet Uncle Davy. But there's a little gal that was at several little gals that were at our big dinner, Mary, and they were just like me. I mean, they grew up looking at this picture, and they're like, "Well, what happened, to Uncle Uvalde? And what happened? What happened to them?" And it helps to get with other families, I think.
Unfortunately, there still are Korean veterans that don't think we did good in Korea, but all you have to do is look at it and see what kind of a life they're having now. That we saved the country, and I reiterate, saved 50 million people, and every one of them will tell you thank you for what you did.
Yeah, when they went through the list of the people at that dinner, and they held up the pictures when the loved one wasn't there, and they held up the pictures of their fallen servicemen. That was so moving and so emotional that those families were there, and just the way that the South Korean people were at that dinner, coming here and doing it. I can't imagine. That had to be 100 times greater when you went there.
It was. I remember there are two organizations, the MPVA, which is Minister of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, a government company, is paying for the revisits, except the Satan Church, Presbyterian Church in Seoul, about 40,000 people, did what Mary's talking about. They paid for all the expenses for that dinner we had, the hotel rooms, and invited families and combat veterans to go visit there in the Sheraton Hotel in Arlington. It was really a treat, a nice thing for the Satan Church personnel, and the members of that church paid for all the expenses we had, and it was a wonderful affair. But part of that too was because we had just dedicated our Korean memorial in Arlington, and I would invite anyone within the sound of my voice to go and visit the memorial that we have in Arlington in the Veterans Park now. And Sherri was a big part of getting that together, helping to raise the money, get it designed and built. And I have to say very strongly thank you to Sherri for all she did for that.
Well, it was my honor. I can tell you, after all you guys had sacrificed, it was nothing for me to sacrifice a few, more than a few hours, but with Ministry of Patriot and Veterans Affairs was very interesting.
But it's amazing to see. It's amazing to see people like you, Larry and Sherri, where once upon a time, your paths crossed, and then you came together to have such an impact on the Gold Star families, on helping people understand the forgotten victory, and just the lives that you've touched to help the world become a better place. And that's just it's so honorable to see that happen and see the work that both of you have done and continue to do.
Thank you, Rick. I think that's exactly right. It was a melding of two personalities, and out of that, we've had wonderful things, and especially, I think, for the Gold Star families to be a part of visiting Korea, get some of their wounds healed. I'm sure it's hard to ever get over that fully, but I think a lot of them feel a lot better about what their loved one did when you see how appreciative the people over there are. And another thing, Sherri got involved when I was president of the National Association. She got involved in helping us do a lot of things in the Korean Veterans Association just because she wants to help. And I'm glad she saw that we really did something good over there.
We're not done yet. We need to educate our young people about American sacrifice. We've got to do it. And
it's crazy when you said that how much the Korean children knew about World War II and Korea and Vietnam. It's the same thing in Europe, but you come here and you ask school children and they don't know anything. They get a paragraph in a textbook at some point, and that's it. We're not teaching history. So it's no wonder that young people don't have the same patriotism, and they don't see what the veterans have given. They just look at us as, you're just a crazy old guy, right? We have failed our children in so many ways.
And Mary, you hit the nail on the head. I spent 30 years in public schools, and I was appalled that, I taught AP kids, so my kids were really smart. And, one Veterans Day, I asked them what day it was and what they could tell me about what this all means. It was Veterans Day, and, none of them knew. And none of those brilliant kids, some of them went to MIT, later on and became scientists. None of them could tell me anything about World War II even. They couldn't tell me anything. But they could sure all tell me about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And that got me started to thinking, what in the world are these kids learning about? Did they not learn about us landing on the beaches of Normandy? Did they not learn about us freeing an entire nation from tyranny in Korea?
Nope.
We've just got.
They're not. They're just not.
And that's why it's so important to do like Roll Call does and to do like Larry's done, to take our veterans into the schools, to introduce them to these students so they could see a real live person and hear firsthand stories about what these veterans did when they were in service.
Well, Rick, I'd just like to reemphasize about that kind of a program. Most of the kids don't appreciate the freedoms we have, and it's a shame. When we were able to go into the schools and talk to them about freedom is not free and help them understand the price has been paid by many, many Americans to have what they have and the freedoms they choose. Of course, a lot of them don't think they're free because their parents tell them what to do all the time. But they do live in a free country and are able to take advantage of a lot of things that others don't do when you don't recognize that. And Mary, thank you for all you do at Roll Call. You sacrifice a lot of your personal.
I love it. I love every minute of what
and you do a really good job. And from one that knows, thank you for all of what you're doing.
And ditto that, Mary.
Too kind.
Well, thank you all so much for being on our podcast today. And Larry, we just appreciate you, all that you've done. And we want to have both of you come back and tell us some more stories, because I know Larry and I talked for 30 or 40 minutes yesterday, and he's got a lot more stories that we haven't heard. And Sherri, I talked to her for about the same amount of time, and she's got a lot more stories. But, we just appreciate you both for all you do to keep our veterans' memory alive, and the sacrifices that our veterans, our military and our veterans have made. And y'all are both great Americans, and we just appreciate so much y'all doing the work that you do.
Rick, thank you for what you do too. I think being able to broadcast a little bit of this to our fellow Americans, or hopefully they'll know that we did a good job in Korea, in spite of what they hear a lot of times, that we went there to protect the freedoms not only of the U.S., but also of the Korean people. And we accomplished that forgotten victory.
Well, thank you all so much for being on today. And
my honor, for sure.
And we can't forget the book, Bringing Davy Back Home. You can go to Amazon and get that book, or the Texas A&M. They have a place where you can get it also, don't they, Sherri?
Yes, they do. And I didn't want to say this with Mr. Kinard on here, but I'm trying to get us a really nice Christmas dinner catered. And, I'm going to use my proceeds from the book. Of course, Amazon and Texas A&M will get their cut, but mine are going to go to the veterans. Hopefully it won't be hamburgers.
Let's hope that it's steak and lobster, that you sell so many books that you have steak and lobster.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for being part of this, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. Mary.
Love you.
Well, that was great, Mary.
Man, I'll tell you, you spend any time at all with Larry, and he has an outlook, and now we didn't really talk about it, but he's going through cancer treatment right now, and we had no idea how that was going to go or what was going to happen. And I talked to his son John, and when I checked on him the one time and said, well, how's he doing after we had that dinner in June? And he said, wow, he's doing really great. And it was such great news that's when we were able to get him out to the ball game and let him be honored. But, a lot of the Korea War veterans, they kind of do feel forgotten, because you hear so much about World War II and you hear so much about Vietnam. And yeah, that's a picture right there of Larry surrounded by the Lockheed folks. And I'll tell you, Lockheed, when they do this thing with the Rangers and the Rangers people, I don't know where they find people, but everybody we encounter at the Rangers, all the employees of the Rangers, take such incredible care of our veterans. And even not knowing who you are when you're walking out the door, the people are everybody's so friendly. I don't know how they do it, but these folks are there every time we take a veteran, and just love on them and care for them. So it's so amazing. But you really get to know these guys and get to know their stories, and their stories are so important, because we have to share them and we have to teach people. Otherwise, nobody really realizes, oh, Korea, we went there. Yeah. And it was pretty ugly. It was a lot of ugly.
It was.
If we go back there again, the first few that get there it's going to be pretty ugly. So hopefully we can keep from ever having to go back into Korea. And that's, we all know that crazy guy in the north is every day he's a little challenge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we've got, we talked a lot today about the Gold Star families with Sherri here and her Uncle Davy and the experiences they had. And this month at Roll Call, the theme is Gold Star families. So uh, we've got Terry Burgess and Carla Wicks, and we have some more Gold Star families that are going to be there.
We do. Carla's got quite the lineup of folks that are going to be there. A couple of them speaking, and but I think she's going to have about 18 Gold Star family members in total there at the lunch. They obviously won't all be speaking, but they'll be there so that folks that attend the lunch will be able to visit with them before and then, during the meal period and after. But it should be a really great lunch. The RSVP line is open. I haven't looked at it this morning, but at 6:00 last night, we were already well over 300 RSVPs. So I'll look at it again here in a little bit and see where we are and how many. So I'll have to calculate how many volunteers so I know how many more seats we. But it's really just going to be a really neat lunch. And we got a couple of other things happening. So tomorrow, 4 of our veterans are going to go on a biplane with the Dream Flights people.
Wow.
Yeah. So Vietnam veteran Bill Henry, Korea War Jerry Brown, and 2 World War II guys, Al Chatwin, who just got back from Guam, is going to go, and Carlisle Hayes, and they're going to go up in a biplane tomorrow, and it's going to be really neat. They're about to hit the group Dream Flights is about to hit their 7,000th. So one of those World War II veterans will be $69.99 and the other will be 7,000.
Wow.
So flights for that organization that takes those veterans up, and they've offered some more seats for if we have any World War II, Korea, or Vietnam veterans that are listening or will hear this between now and the end of today. They've offered some extra seats for the Thursday mission. So this Thursday, but they'll have to get a hold of us at info@roll-call.org to get those. But we can send a few more people if anybody is still out there and interested in going up in one of those biplanes. I'm not one of those people, but somebody out there might be.
I wonder if Jerry and Bill are going to take their parachutes because they've been doing some skydiving the last couple of years. So I guess if
I don't think they're jumping out of this plane though.
I hope not. I hope not.
Yeah.
So roll call is the 27th, and it's at the Willow Park Baptist Church, not Birchman Baptist Church. So you need to go to Willow Park Baptist Church. It's going to be a
RSVP because you got to do that in order to be able to come. And that RSVP line is open right now at our website, roll-call.org. Yep.
Let me get that up there, right there, roll-call.org. The clay shoot's coming up on the 13th of October at Defender Outdoor Clay Sports Ranch. And last year was absolutely great. The weather was great and everything, everybody had a good time. And I think this is going to be even better. We have a lot of raffles, and you don't have to come to shoot. You can just come out there and hang out, can't you?
You sure can. And we did change a few things up last time it was our first time. And we did a lot of extra drawings and everything else that ended up taking more time than we had wanted to do. So we're going to do a silent auction and a live auction, and the live auction will be a minimum number of items. There won't be a lot of items, but some really neat stuff, handmade wooden items from one of our members, Dan Ovenshine, a quilt from Miriam Pink. Of course, we're going to have the 20 guns in 20 minutes. And there's another gun that is going to be available only for the shooters in the clay shoot, that they'll get tickets to, and they don't have to buy anything. They just, every single person that comes out to shoot that day will get entries for that gun, and no one else will be eligible for it, just them. So there's some neat things that we're going to do. And, there'll be food, there'll be beverages. So it really will be a good time. And if somebody just wants to come out and meet some veterans, we'll have some of the World War II, Korea, Vietnam vets out there just to hang out and visit. And we'll have some autograph stuff from Don Graves. But it'll be just a lot of fun. And if people just want to come out and be there for the auction afterwards or participate in the gun drawing, then, come on out for that. You don't have to sign up. You just come on out.
That's a good deal. That's the 13th of October. It'll be here before we know it. Also on the 13th, Also on the 13th of October is the Fall Fest at Pioneers Rest, the oldest cemetery in Fort Worth. They're going to have a great day out there. They've got reenactors that portray different people that are buried there, and have food trucks and just a big fun day. In November, on Veterans Day, excuse me, Freedom Mobility Foundation is having a golf tournament, the Veterans Day Golf Challenge. Sponsors Lockheed Martin and Armed Forces Bowl. We'll have a great day out there. You can find out more right here at the freemobilityfoundation.org website. And we do a lot of great stuff there. November the 21st is Skyball, the Air Power Foundation Skyball, one of the great military appreciation events. It's going to be at Globe Life Field, and you can get tickets there for that. So a lot of great things happening in Fort Worth and in the North Texas area. Don't forget about the Return to D-Day Beaches Adventure. Dwayne Lee, one of our roll call members, we're booking now for next year, the summer of 2025. And if you book a trip, $200 and $250 donation will be made to roll call. So that would be exciting. I know, Mary, you're going to plan on going to that trip. Trip.
And a small group. You don't have to be in the big crowds and crowds of people where you can't get anywhere, can't see or hear anything. So Dwayne does it in small groups where you can go 10 to 12 people and you move around and get to everything. And they have the folks that know all about all of the areas that we're going to go return to D-Day. So it's going to be really cool and looking forward to it.
And from what I've seen, the Phillips family, a lot of them are over in Europe now. I know that Liberty and Faith, they both did some jumps, and Liberty's getting on up there. She's going to have 100 jumps under her belt before long. So,
yeah, crazy.
And they're with the Operation Meatball, and then also the Bridge to History. So a lot of interesting things going on with a lot of interesting people. And this being the Gold Star family, or Gold Star, we're going to recognize the Gold Star parents and family members and spouses and children at roll call. I just want to always remember and never forget Staff Sergeant Brian Burgess, killed in action March 29th, 2011. And Terry Burgess was really the first, his dad, Terry Burgess, was really the first Gold Star parent or Gold Star family member that I really interacted with and learned about what Gold Star families are and the things they go through. So let's always remember those that have served our country and lost their life doing it. So, Mary, it's been a good program. And I think we'll have another good program next week.
Yes, we will.
And we will see you next week on Hometown Heroes.